When someone speaks a certain sentence to an empath, something inside the psyche already knows long before the mind intervenes that this moment did not arise by chance. I want you to feel this before you understand it, because the empath does not first think reality. The empath receives it, and what is received enters through the unconscious, not the intellect. I am speaking to you now as one who has spent a lifetime listening to the quiet language beneath words, not the language of grammar, but the language of psychic intention. And I tell you this carefully. When someone says that sentence to an empath, the one that wounds gently, that disarms politely, that disguises itself as concern or truth or honesty, it is never accidental. It is an event in the field of the unconscious. It is a signal exchanged between two psyches long before the mouths moved. You have noticed this. Even if you did not name it, there are sentences that do not merely communicate, they enter. They settle somewhere behind the sternum, behind the eyes, in the soft tissue of memory. You may walk away and hours later feel strangely hollow, or heavy, or unsettled without knowing why. That is because the sentence did not land in consciousness. It bypassed it. It went directly into the place where your old agreements live. The empath, by nature, is porous, not weak, porous. This is a different thing. The empath psyche has not fully sealed itself against the emotional atmosphere of others. And this openness, which in childhood was necessary for survival, later becomes the very channel through which others unconsciously act upon them. The world senses this openness instinctively. You do not need to announce it. The unconscious of others already knows. There is a mistake many empaths make. They believe harm requires intention. They imagine that if the other did not consciously plan to wound, then the wound must be imagined. But the psyche does not operate on moral intention. It operates on energy, pattern, compensation, and shadow. Much of what is said between human beings is spoken by the unconscious, not from the ego. When someone says a particular phrase to an empath, often calmly, often casually, sometimes even kindly, it is because something in them has detected your sensitivity, your receptivity, your tendency to internalize. The phrase is selected not by reason, but by instinct, the same instinct by which an animal knows where the soft flesh is. I am not accusing, I am describing. The shadow does not announce itself as evil. It announces itself as normalcy. There are words that function like keys. They unlock doors in the psyche that were built long before the present moment. Often these doors were installed in childhood, when the empath learned that love was conditional, that harmony required self-erasure, that safety depended on attunement. When a sentence touches that old architecture, the door opens automatically, and the one who speaks it may not know they are holding the key, but the key fits, and that is enough. You must understand something essential. The empath's unconscious is trained to receive responsibility, responsibility for moods, for harmony, for emotional outcomes. So when someone says something that subtly implies fault, burden, or inadequacy, especially in a quiet or reasonable tone, the empath's psyche moves reflexively into accommodation, not because the statement is true, but because the pattern is old. This is why it was never an accident. The psyche on the other side sensed a compensatory opportunity. Often the speaker feels vaguely relieved after saying it, lighter, calmer, as if something has been transferred, and something has been psychic weight. You may have noticed how certain people feel strangely regulated after speaking with you, while you feel drained, confused, or self questioning. That is not coincidence. It is an unconscious transaction. I am not suggesting malevolence. Most of these exchanges are not cruel, they are automatic. The unconscious seeks balance. When one psyche habitually carries too much, another will unconsciously offer it more. This is how systems maintain equilibrium until one element awakens. And awakening is precisely what disturbs the system. There comes a moment, often subtle, often delayed, when the empath begins to notice the pattern, not intellectually at first, but somatically, a tightening, a fatigue that arrives too quickly, a recurring sense of being misunderstood in the same specific way. The psyche begins to whisper, "This is familiar." That whisper is the beginning of individuation. In my later years, I came to understand that consciousness does not expand through affirmation, but through discomfort that cannot be explained away. When something repeats with symbolic precision, it is asking to be seen. The empath's task is not to harden, nor to withdraw completely, but to become aware of what is being exchanged beneath the words. You see, the moment you recognize that the sentence was not accidental, it loses part of its power, not because you resist it, but because you no longer merge with it unconsciously. You witness it, and witnessing introduces separation. This is deeply threatening to relational systems that depend on your unconscious participation. When you stop absorbing, others feel destabilized without knowing why. They may attempt to repeat the sentence, or escalate it, or soften it, or cloak it in humor. But the goal is the same: restoration of the old balance. The empath often feels guilt at this stage, not moral guilt, but archetypal guilt, the guilt of betraying the role of emotional container, translator, absorber. This guilt does not belong to the present moment. It belongs to the original contract. Every empath carries such a contract. It is not written, it is inherited. Often it emerges from a family system where emotional complexity could not be held by the adults, and so the child learned to hold it instead. That child becomes exquisitely attuned and later exquisitely vulnerable to certain kinds of speech. When someone says that sentence to you now, in adulthood, they are not speaking only as themselves, they are speaking as a representative of the pattern, and your reaction is not only yours, it is the echo of the child who learned long ago that attunement equals survival. This is why reasoning alone cannot free you. The body already knows the script. The unconscious recognizes the tone, the timing, the subtle implication before thought arrives. The psyche has already moved, but awareness changes the movement slowly, gently, irreversibly. When you begin to pause, not to respond immediately, not to absorb reflexively, you interrupt something ancient, and interruption is sacred. It is how new symbols are born. I want you to understand, the goal is not to prove that the other intended harm. That is a superficial concern of the ego. The deeper task is to see what part of you was addressed by the sentence, what archetype was invoked, what old door was opened, because once you see that, the sentence can no longer pass unnoticed. It may still sting, but it will not possess you. This is the beginning of the empath's quiet power, not dominance, not withdrawal, but presence. Presence dissolves unconscious contracts. And that is why, when someone says this to an empath, it was never an accident. It was a summons, and whether you answer it as you always have or as someone new is the real question now unfolding within you. There is something else you must see, and it is more unsettling than the idea that the sentence was intentional. The more difficult truth is this: the sentence was necessary not for you, but for the psychic economy of the relationship as it has existed. When someone speaks that particular phrase to an empath, they are unconsciously restoring an order in which they feel oriented, relieved, or stabilized. The words act like a lever. They shift weight, and you, because of who you have been trained to be, have historically allowed yourself to become the counterweight. This is why the empath so often feels confused after such encounters. Confusion is not weakness. Confusion is the psyche trying to reconcile two incompatible realities: the surface meaning of the words and the deeper effect they have produced. The conscious mind says, "That didn't sound so bad." The body says, "Something was taken." The psyche trusts the body more than language. Always. You must understand that language in human relationships is rarely used to transmit truth. It is used to regulate distance, to manage anxiety, to discharge tension, to establish hierarchy, to secure attachment. The unconscious is far more pragmatic than the moral mind. It wants equilibrium, it wants relief, and it will use whatever instrument is available. In the presence of an empath, words become particularly effective instruments, not because you are naive, but because you listen with more than your ears. You listen with memory, with affect, with intuition, with the deep strata of the psyche where meaning is felt before it is known. There are people who sense this immediately. They may not think this person is an empath, but they feel something unmistakable. I can speak freely here. I can offload here. I will not be resisted here. And so the unconscious selects a sentence that appears benign yet carries implication. Often it begins with concern, or honesty, or vulnerability. It may even sound like intimacy, but embedded within it is a subtle repositioning. You are invited to hold something that was never meant to be yours. The empath's danger is not cruelty. It is misplaced responsibility. In my clinical work, I observed again and again that those with heightened sensitivity are not harmed by overt aggression as much as by covert expectation. Aggression can be defended against, expectation cannot, because it masquerades as relationship. When someone says that sentence to you, notice what follows. Often there is a silence, a pause, and in that pause, something is being waited for. Not a reply, but a movement, an internal shift, a softening, an acceptance. The other psyche waits to feel whether the transfer has occurred. And when it does, there is relief. You may not see it, but you will feel it. The air changes. The other person settles. Their shoulders drop. Their voice steadies. They feel less burdened, and you feel heavier. This is not imagination. This is the somatic evidence of psychic exchange. The tragedy of the empath is that this exchange once saved them. In early life, attunement created safety. Being able to sense and absorb emotional undercurrents allowed the child to anticipate danger, to maintain connection, to keep the system intact. The psyche does not forget what once ensured survival, but what was adaptive in childhood becomes costly in adulthood. The unconscious does not update itself through insight alone. It updates itself through experience that contradicts expectation. And this is where the empath's work becomes difficult. Because to contradict the old expectation to not absorb, to not repair, to not immediately contextualize the other's emotional discharge feels like betrayal. Betrayal of whom? Not the other person. The deeper betrayal is of the internalized figure who once demanded this role. The parent, the family system, the archetypal authority that taught you, wordlessly, that love is earned through emotional labor. So, when you begin to resist, not outwardly, but inwardly, you may feel anxiety that seems disproportionate. You may fear abandonment, conflict, or moral failure, but these fears do not belong to the present relationship. They belong to the original psychic environment. This is why awakening feels lonely, not because you are becoming isolated, but because you are separating from the collective unconscious pattern that once held you. Individuation always feels like exile before it feels like home. I want to be precise here. The goal is not to become impermeable. That would be another defense, another distortion. The goal is to develop discernment, to feel the moment when a sentence seeks entry, and to decide consciously whether it belongs to you. This decision may not come as words, it may come as a pause, a breath, a delay in response. That pause is everything. In that pause, the unconscious contract is interrupted, and interruption introduces uncertainty into the old system. The other person may feel unsettled. They may push again, or they may withdraw, or they may become irritated without knowing why. This reaction is not about you, it is about the loss of unconscious regulation. You see, many relationships are not built on mutual recognition, but on mutual use, not conscious use, archetypal use. One psyche unconsciously carries what the other cannot. This arrangement can persist for years, even decades, without either party understanding it. But when one party awakens, the arrangement becomes visible, and what becomes visible can no longer function invisibly. This is often when the empath is accused, subtly or overtly, of changing, of becoming distant, of being selfish, of withholding. These accusations are not evaluations of character. They are expressions of psychic disorientation. The system is speaking through the individual. It is at this stage that many empaths turn back. They retreat into the familiar role. They explain, they reassure, they absorb once more, and the system stabilizes. But something inside them dims. That dimming is the soul's grief. The soul does not want harmony at the cost of truth. It wants alignment, and alignment requires that you no longer accept sentences that assign you a burden you did not choose. I am not telling you to confront. Confrontation is often premature and unnecessary. I am telling you to see. Seeing is the beginning of freedom. When you truly see that the sentence was not accidental, You stop personalizing it. You stop asking, "What did I do wrong?" And you begin asking, "What role is being invoked here?" This shift in question changes everything. Because roles can be declined, you may not yet know how to decline them gracefully. That comes with time, but the psyche learns quickly once the illusion breaks. The unconscious respects clarity, even when the ego resists it. And there is something profound that happens when the empath no longer absorbs automatically. Their presence changes. Others may not know why, but they sense a boundary that did not exist before. Not a wall, but a center of gravity. This center is not loud, it does not argue, it does not explain, it simply does not move. And this, paradoxically, is what restores dignity to you and to the relationship, whether it survives or not, because relationships that require your unconscious self-erasure were never sustainable. They were only stable because you carried the cost. When someone says that sentence to an empath, and the empath no longer receives it in the old way, something ancient ends, not with noise, but with silence that finally belongs to you. There is a threshold you cross when you no longer react automatically to that sentence. It is quiet, almost unnoticeable, and yet nothing is the same afterward. The outer relationship may continue, unchanged in appearance, but inwardly a line has been drawn. Not consciously at first, the psyche does this on its own. When it recognizes that an old movement no longer serves the whole, what you experience at this threshold is often a strange neutrality. The sentence is spoken, but it does not penetrate as deeply. It lands, but it does not root. And this absence of the usual internal disturbance can feel unsettling, even frightening. Many empaths mistake this neutrality for coldness or loss of compassion. It is neither. It is the psyche beginning to withdraw its surplus investment. I must tell you something that is rarely spoken plainly. Much of what the empath calls compassion is actually over-identification. It is the inability to distinguish between what belongs to the self and what belongs to the other. True compassion requires separation. Without separation, there is only fusion, and fusion is exhausting. When someone says that familiar sentence and you do not respond as expected, the unconscious of the other senses it immediately. The words may be followed by a subtle tension, an almost imperceptible recalibration. They may repeat themselves, soften the tone, add justification, or shift the conversation entirely. These movements are not strategic, they are instinctual. The psyche is searching for the old opening. This is where many empaths feel a sudden impulse to repair the moment, to reassure, to explain themselves, to smooth the air. This impulse feels moral, even loving. But look more closely. It is not love that demands you abandon your center. It is fear. Fear of disruption, fear of withdrawal, fear of losing connection by refusing to perform the familiar function. This fear does not originate in the present. It is the echo of an earlier time when disruption truly meant danger, when the child sensed that emotional imbalance in the environment could lead to withdrawal, punishment, or chaos. The psyche learned then that stability depended on self-adjustment. And now, in adulthood, when the old sentence is spoken, that same ancient alarm stirs. But something else stirs as well, a new sensation, a firmness, a quiet refusal that does not argue with the words, but does not follow them either. This is the emergence of the observing ego, not the judging ego, but the witnessing one. The witness does not ask whether the sentence is fair, it asks whether the sentence belongs. This distinction is everything. Fairness belongs to consciousness. Belonging belongs to the unconscious. And the unconscious already knows when something foreign is being introduced. You feel it as a subtle resistance, a heaviness that does not quite settle, a sense that something is being placed in your hands that you did not reach for. In the past, you would have accepted it anyway, not because you wanted to, but because your identity was entangled with usefulness. Being needed felt like being safe, but identity shifts when consciousness expands, and when identity shifts, the old exchanges lose their footing. There is a moment, often painful, when you realize that some people do not actually see you. They feel you, they use you as a psychic surface, a regulator, a container, but they do not encounter you as a separate center. This realization can feel like grief. Do not rush past that grief. It is the grief of disillusionment, and it is necessary. The psyche mourns not the loss of the other, but the loss of the fantasy that mutuality existed where there was only function. This mourning is part of individuation. You cannot become whole without withdrawing projections, both yours and theirs. When someone says that sentence to an empath, and the empath no longer absorbs it, the projection collapses. The other may feel suddenly exposed, unsettled, or oddly irritated. They may accuse you subtly of changing, of being distant, of not being yourself, but you are becoming yourself. The old self was a role organized around unconscious expectation. The emerging self is organized around inner coherence. This coherence is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It simply stops bending. And bending, I must emphasize, is not the same as flexibility. Flexibility arises from strength. Bending arises from fear. As this change takes root, you may notice an increase in silence, both yours and others. Silence has always frightened the empath, because silence once meant emotional abandonment. But silence is also the space in which the psyche reorganizes itself. When you no longer rush to fill silence, something remarkable happens. You begin to hear yourself, not the anxious voice that seeks approval, but the deeper voice that knows when something is misaligned. This voice does not speak in full sentences. It speaks in sensation, image, intuition. This is the voice of the self. The self does not demand that you cut people off. It does not require confrontation. It asks only that you stop participating unconsciously, and this alone is enough to transform your relational field. You may begin to notice that certain people drift away without explanation. Others may intensify their efforts to re-engage you in the old way. A few, very few, may actually meet you differently, with greater respect and clarity. These outcomes are not choices you make, they are consequences of alignment. I want to address something delicate now. Many empaths fear that if they stop absorbing, they will become selfish, cruel, or emotionally unavailable. This fear arises from a confusion between boundaries and indifference. Boundaries are not walls. They are points of contact that define where one psyche ends and another begins. Without boundaries, there is no real meeting, only merging. And merging is regressive. It returns you to a state before differentiation. It feels intimate, but it is not mature. Mature intimacy requires two centers, not one dissolving into the other. When someone says that sentence to you and you remain inwardly still, you are not rejecting them, you are refusing to disappear. This refusal may feel unnatural at first. The body may react with anxiety, guilt, even nausea. These sensations are not signs that you are doing something wrong. They are signs that you are undoing a long-standing pattern. The nervous system protests before it recalibrates. Give it time. The psyche needs repeated experiences of non-absorption to learn that safety does not collapse when you remain centered. Each time you survive the moment without taking on what is not yours, the unconscious updates its expectations. Gradually, the sentence loses its charge, not because it is no longer spoken, but because it no longer finds the same receptive architecture within you. This is a profound shift, and it often happens without words, without declarations, without explanations. You will know it has occurred when you no longer replay the conversation afterward, when the words do not echo in your mind, demanding interpretation or repair, when you can let them pass through you without lodging. This is not detachment, it is integration. The empath who integrates does not become numb, they become selective. They feel deeply, but they do not carry indiscriminately. They listen, but they do not absorb reflexively. They care, but they do not collapse inwardly to preserve harmony. And this is why the sentence was never an accident. It was part of a pattern that existed so long as you unconsciously consented to it. When that consent withdraws, the pattern dissolves, not dramatically, but inevitably. When the pattern finally dissolves, it does not do so with noise or confrontation. It ends the way most unconscious things end, by no longer being fed. There is no dramatic reckoning, no moral victory. There is simply a quiet absence where something once repeated itself, and that absence can feel disorienting, even empty, because repetition, no matter how painful, creates a sense of orientation. The empath often mistakes this emptiness for loss. But it is not loss, it is space, and space is frightening only to a psyche that has been conditioned to define itself through response. For a long time, your sense of self was organized around attunement. You knew who you were by how quickly you adjusted, how deeply you felt, how much you could hold. When that organizing principle weakens, the psyche must find a new center. This transition can feel like floating, like being unmoored. Do not rush to fill this space. The unconscious is not empty. It is fertile. When old patterns withdraw, images begin to rise. Dreams may intensify. You may find yourself drawn to symbols, to solitude, to moments of reflection that do not serve any immediate relational purpose. This is not withdrawal from life, it is return to the inner life. In this phase, many empaths experience a profound reorientation of energy. They are no longer constantly scanning the emotional environment. The vigilance softens, and with it comes fatigue, sometimes deep fatigue. This fatigue is not pathology. It is the body recovering from long-term hyper-attunement. Rest is not indulgence here. it is integration. As this recovery unfolds, something subtle changes in how others approach you. Some will speak less, others will choose their words more carefully, without knowing why. A few may feel vaguely uncomfortable in your presence. They sense that something has closed not against them, but against unconscious access. You have become less available for projection. This is a crucial point. The empath's awakening does not require that others change. It requires only that you no longer serve as the unconscious screen upon which their unresolved material is displayed. When the screen withdraws, the projection collapses, and what collapses must return to its source. This return is often experienced by the other as discomfort, restlessness, or irritation. They may not associate it with you at all. They may simply feel unsettled in your presence. This is not your responsibility. Responsibility is a word that must be re-examined by the empath. True responsibility belongs to the self. False responsibility is assumed in order to maintain attachment. You have lived too long under the latter. There is something almost sacred about the moment when you realize that you are not required to metabolize what others cannot. This realization does not harden you, it clarifies you. You begin to feel your own weight again, your own emotional gravity, and gravity is essential for orbit. Without it, everything drifts. With this gravity comes a new kind of compassion, one that does not rescue, but respects, one that allows others to experience their own psychic consequences. This compassion may look colder from the outside, but it is more honest. It does not steal the other's opportunity to grow by absorbing their discomfort. You may notice that you speak less, or that when you do speak, your words are simpler, more precise. The need to explain diminishes. Explanation was always a way of managing others' reactions. When you stop managing, explanation loses its urgency. Silence becomes a form of integrity. I want you to understand something essential before we end this reflection. The sentence that was spoken to you, the one that always seemed to find its mark, was never about the words themselves. It was about excess. It was about the unconscious permission you once gave to be entered in a particular way. When that permission is withdrawn, the words lose their function. They may still be spoken, but they no longer open anything. They fall to the ground, inert. This is not because you have become closed. It is because you have become whole. Wholeness does not mean perfection. It means that the psyche no longer sacrifices parts of itself to preserve external equilibrium. It means that the empath's sensitivity is no longer turned inward against the self. At this stage, many empaths experience a deepening of solitude, not loneliness. But aloneness is the condition in which the self can finally speak without interference. This is where vocation, creativity, and authentic connection are born. Relationships that survive this shift do so on new terms. They are quieter, more mutual, less charged. They do not require constant regulation. They allow for difference, for silence, for separate centers of gravity. Relationships that do not survive were never truly relational. They were systems of exchange built on asymmetry. Their ending is not failure, it is completion. And so we arrive at the final understanding. When someone says that sentence to an empath, It was never an accident, because nothing in the psyche is accidental once it repeats. Repetition is the language of the unconscious. It continues until it is made conscious, and then it releases its hold. You were never meant to carry what was not yours. You did so because you were sensitive, perceptive, and capable, but capacity is not obligation. The work now is not to analyze every word spoken to you, nor to guard yourself against all influence. The work is simpler and more demanding: to remain present within yourself when the old invitation appears, to feel the impulse to absorb and to let it pass. In doing so, you do not lose your gift, you return it to its proper place. And that is the quiet dignity of the empath who has awakened, not louder, not harder, not more defended, but finally aligned with the deeper order of the psyche.